Another dull weekend of international football, despite 5 second-half goals from England, is finally over, and we can now start to look ahead to the game at the Etihad against Manchester City this Saturday at 5:30 p.m. A huge one for Tottenham Hotspur. Meanwhile, reports that Big Ange Postecoglou has fallen out with some of his most senior players, as well as rumours that we're interested in bringing an exciting Spanish talent back to Europe from Saudi Arabia, a move for which he was called embarrassing by Tony Kroos, no less. All this and plenty more on today's episode of the Spurred On podcast. Guys, thank you so much for watching and listening. Please do give this video a like. Please do subscribe to the channel if you're not already and you want some daily Tottenham Hotspur content and transfer content from across the Premier League and beyond as we get closer to that transfer window. But let's get straight into it. And I'm sure you've already heard and read the reports at the back end of last week that Ange Postecoglou has apparently had a fallout with at least 4 of Tottenham's senior stars. Apparently, the bust-up is between him and Destiny Udogie, Guillermo Vicario, as well as Rodrigo Bentancur and Christian Romero. And apparently they are all upset with Ange Postecoglou. Now, I did a watch-along for the England versus Ireland game yesterday on Big Up, which is where I'll be doing some of my watch-alongs. So do go to bigup.com and type in the Spurred On podcast to see some watch-alongs with me. But on there, I was discussing this matter. And what I say about it is this. I do believe in a lot of these cases that there's no smoke without fire. However, you also have to be realistic. Ange Postecoglou is a big, strong, stubborn, idealistic man, and he believes in the way that he wants to play football and the desire that he needs from his players. And I think it's perfectly feasible that after a couple of the results in the last month or two, he has gone in on his players, and rightly so. Certainly after that Ipswich game, he absolutely had the right to go in on them and suggest that they weren't working hard enough and that they weren't playing well enough. And of course, if a manager does that, especially in the modern age, then players are going to get upset. I mean, it doesn't matter what age or era it is, players would always get upset, but that is the reality of management, and sometimes you have to do it. Now, what I like about Postecoglou is I think he knows when to put an arm around the shoulder, like he did, for instance, with James Maddison after he scored his free kick against Aston Villa, despite him having been dropped for the last few games. He put his arm around his shoulder and he said, that's what I need, that's what I want, you're good enough for this. But also, he knows when to get in on those players. And I'm going to use Christian Romero as an example, and I'll be talking about him a little bit more even in this episode as well because of his injury, which I preempted, by the way, before the international break. But Romero just hasn't been at it. And therefore, if Ange Postecoglou, especially if it's after that Ipswich game, went to Romero, listen, I think you told me you were fit enough to play in this game so you could go off to Argentina, and you were terrible, and you didn't look fit at all, and I think you've lied to me. Listen, I've no idea if that's exactly what it was, but let's say it was something like that. Or if he had a go at Romero for his lapses of concentration this season so far, then he has every right to do it. He's the manager of the club, and he is able to say, I need more from you. And he's also able to say, if you don't give me more, you'll be out. You'll be out of this project. We've got to believe in the manager. We've got to have patience with the manager, and we've got to give him the absolute right to get into those players. Now, there is a step where it can go too far, and that's where I'd say the Antonio Conte side of things was, where basically it seemed like he was just in on his players the whole time. He had no ability to put the arm around the shoulder, to give carrot rather than stick, and that didn't work out, and I don't think that's going to work in the current climate of modern day football, of modern day the knowledge of people's emotions, the knowledge of the mentality or the of mental health issues, etc. Now, some of you might say to me, well, Napoli are top of the league in Italy. Well, let's see what happens in Italy. Certainly, I would say that Italian footballers are far more willing to listen to tactical advice and tactical advice only. It's a much more tactical league. And I think Conte was always frustrated with how difficult it was to get players in the Premier League to stick to his tactics, and I think that made him more and more angry. But also, it's only been a few months at Napoli. Let's see what happens when the first signs of bad results happen. Don't forget, the first 6 months or so at Spurs were also very, very positive. Got us from absolutely nowhere into the Champions League. So time will tell whether Conte will still be able to do it with that kind of stick-based approach. But in terms of Postecoglou and him being able to go in on his players and say that they've not been giving enough and they've not been getting the results that are good enough for this club, I think we would all agree, wouldn't we, that we should absolutely allow him to do that. Now, another question worth asking is he starting to feel the pressure? And is that why maybe he started being a little bit more assertive, at least, maybe even aggressive with his players in the changing room? That is also a possibility. We don't get to see a camera in the changing room. We don't get to know what's going on at the training ground, really. But I'm sure the pressure is ramping up on Ange a little bit. He's talked about it before, hasn't he? He had a couple of bad results, including the Palace result. And then he had a couple of good results, and the press were like, it's your 50th game in charge of Spurs, or your 50th win, or whatever it was. 50th game it must have been. And he said, didn't he? He said, I didn't think you guys were suggesting I might not make it to 50 just a couple of weeks ago. So it is very up and down. It's very reactive, and we need to go on a run of good wins to really, I think, get the players and the fans fully behind Ange. But I think you see from the way the fans are at the home games, they're behind Ange Postecoglou. But we need to allow him the time, the space, the patience to do what he wants with this club from top to bottom, to get that winning mentality into the club. And I personally don't mind if he's upset a few of the players along the way. Okay, next bit of news. Tottenham are keen on the Spanish international Gabri Veiga. And according to Fichajes in Spain, he could be on his way back to Europe. Tottenham have shown an interest in the player. He's 22 years old. And apparently he could prove to be a key piece in the Spurs midfield. I don't know if you've seen him play. He's a kind of very kind of classic Spanish midfielder, really. Quite small, but brilliantly technical on the ball. Takes it on the half turn beautifully. Always looks up, always scanning. Kind of, I'm not suggesting he's at the level of these players, but Xavi and Iniesta-like in his kind of low centre of gravity, how he drives forward from midfield. He's also got a good shot on him. He scored a good few goals from outside the box. Good final ball, good finisher when he goes through one-on-one, and plays passes but doesn't just watch them and enjoy them, goes on for the return, and that's what allows him to get in behind a fair few times. I do like him as a player. He's very versatile. He could be yet another player to, let's say, challenge the likes of James Maddison and Decky Kulusevski in that attacking central midfield role. However, one red flag for me about Gabri Veiga is that he plays for Al Ahly in Saudi Arabia. He's only 22 years old. And he took the big money, €40 million move, because Al Ahly said they paid his full release clause in Spain. And I think I mentioned this last week in videos. In Spain, if you have a contract with a professional football club, you have to have a release clause. And what the club does is they put it to the kind of maximum that they imagine it could, like basically a number where no one would ever pay that money. But Al Ahly did. They paid €40 million for him when he was only 21 years old. And like I said in the opening, Toni Kroos just came out and said that was embarrassing. He could be a future star. He's a great technical player, but is it a red flag for you guys? Let me know in the comments that he went for such a money move so early in his career. He was at Celta Vigo, a good Spanish club, making his career, developing well. And he could, I think, easily have got to move to a bigger Spanish club or another club across Europe, but he went for the money to Saudi Arabia at such a young age. Very rare. So I do wonder if that's a bit of a red flag. Has he got the right motivation to want to come and really kind of improve his career going forward? Who knows? Like I said, let me know what you think in the comments. But very interesting player. Another technically gifted player. One thing I guess that probably counts against him as well is how much Ange Postecoglou wants physicality in his sides. He's not a physical player. Like I said, quite a short central midfielder, but let's see what happens. More news on the interest that I talked about at the back end of last week. Spurs interested in Bayer Leverkusen's centre-half Jonathan Tah. He's always been a big talent, and his contract is coming to the end this summer. And of course, European clubs not in Germany can look to sign him on a pre-agreement this January. Reports coming out that the interest in Tah is genuine, but there will be big competition for his signature. And that again is another reason, like I said last week, why I think Tottenham should, if they're really interested in this player, try and get him in January. Try and throw Leverkusen some money in January that they wouldn't get in the summer, so we can try and jump to the head of the queue to get such a big name player. Patrick Dorgu is another player, isn't he, from France? I think he plays at Lens, who Spurs have been interested in for a while. He was on the list in the summer, and also finals David Hanko is also on the Tottenham list at the moment. So Johan Lange, Scott Munn doing their stuff at the moment as we look at about a month and 10 to 12 days away from the transfer window happening. It looks like Spurs are going to try and improve their squad this January rather than wait for the summer. And I think in terms of the ups and downs of how the season has gone so far, that makes sense. It looks very positive in terms of our progression in the Europa League, so we will need more players in to play the minutes. Even if they're cup-tied from the Europa League, we need them in the Premier League so that we're fresh going into every single game. Now, I mentioned earlier in this episode that I'd be talking more about Christian Romero, and I've got to say, in the least surprising news of all time, Christian Romero has been released from the Argentina squad. He's not going to play in their game against Peru this week, and he's come back to Tottenham Hotspur because he has suffered a recurrence of that foot injury. I said it before the international break. It would not surprise me at all if Christian Romero said to this club that he wanted to play in the Ipswich game so that he could then go to Argentina to play in the international games, and that he would come back with a recurrence of that injury, because clearly that injury had not healed. Anyone who watched Romero in that game against Ipswich could see he was gaunt. He was completely white. For me, it seemed like he'd taken a painkilling injection to try and get through it, painkillers, and it hadn't worked. And he was totally appalling in that game. And he just looked like he could not do it. And listen, who knows what this injury will show, but if he's out for a month now or a few weeks, it'll be so frustrating. And again, another example of how I'm not sure Romero prioritises Tottenham Hotspur over Argentina. And he should. We pay his weekly wages. We are his bread and butter. And I like that he's patriotic. It's important. Of course it is. I love the motivation he has for his country, but not in preference for Tottenham Hotspur. When it comes to your daily bread and butter, when it comes to getting you on the pitch, we need Romero. He's a vital cog in this wheel, and we need him to be fully concentrated and fully at his best form. And it's very frustrating to me that it seems like what was obviously going to happen has happened. More news on the injury front, as I'm sure you've seen. Wilson Odobert posted on his Instagram, and Tottenham did a statement about how he has had an operation on his injured hamstring. That was on the 16th, Saturday, that was. He's 19 years old, and Tottenham say he'll continue to be closely monitored by the medical team to determine when he can return to training. Well, if you've had an operation on your hamstring, that is not good news, and that I'm sure will be a good while before we see Wilson Odobert. And frankly, it would surprise me if we really saw him up to speed much this season. I hope I'm not being alarmist, but you've got to be so careful with these young players and their hamstrings. I want to talk a little bit about the Italy-France game, because a lot of people trying to get on Guillermo Vicario's back. He started his, I think it was his third game for Italy in goal against France. They lost 3-1. And a lot of people giving him stick because he conceded a goal from a corner. Then he scored an own goal from a free kick from Luca Dean. And then the third goal was from a set piece as well. So plenty of people who, I'm not even really sure have seen the highlights, are trying to get on the narrative of Vicario being responsible for the goal from the corner or from the set piece goals. Well, I can tell you, I've seen the game and he is not responsible at all. The goal from a corner was an outswinger from Luca Dean that came to the edge of the 6-yard box. There was absolutely no way that Vicario could have come through the bodies to try and punch or claim that ball, and it was a good header from Adrien Rabiot. So that was not Vicario's issue. The Luca Dean free kick was an absolute peach, left-footed around the wall, and Vicario gets a little fingertip on it, but it goes in off the underside of the bar. Basically, an absolutely perfect free kick from Luca Dean. Absolutely nothing that Guillermo Vicario could have done about that. And then the third goal was from a free kick whipped in, and a great header from Rabiot from about, 12, 14 yards, and it went right into the corner. Nothing that Vicario could have done as well. And so I just wanted to support Vicario a little bit. Listen, I'll give him stick where necessary when it comes to not quite being aggressive enough, trying to push people out of the way to get to corners, but that was not his fault in that Italy-France game whatsoever. And what it really showed me again, and this is something where I'm going to defend Gareth Southgate on, the stats for international football in that game really showed as well. So many of the goals scored at the highest level, at elite level, international football, are from set pieces. And I know a lot of England fans, for instance, want us to play more beautiful football, pretty football, possession football. And sure, we all want that. But also, you've got to train and practice your set pieces, because the standard is so high at international football that set pieces are what give you the best chance of scoring goals. Now, former Tottenham Hotspur goalkeeper Paul Robinson has been talking on a podcast this week about Ange Postecoglou, and I've got the quotes for you here. Very interesting, slightly negative. Paul Robinson said this: "I think he's bang under pressure at the end of the season. if Spurs fail to make it into the Champions League or Europa League again. I think there's got to be some signs of progression under his management. They're being beaten too easily and they're too susceptible defensively. He's stuck with his style when it doesn't necessarily suit some of the players in his side. He'll always be under pressure at Tottenham because the stigma surrounding the need to win a trophy is not going to go away. It's the stick used to beat them with by every other club and their fans. So if he wins a trophy and doesn't reach European football, would that be enough? I'm not convinced. I think European football is vital for Tottenham and where they are as a club. Ange has earned the right to have time, but they don't seem to be learning from their mistakes. At the end of the season, yeah, he's bang under pressure if they don't achieve what they want to achieve, but at the moment, he's okay. In February, if they drop out of the cup competitions and it doesn't look like they'll compete for European places, he could lose his job before the end of the season. So, pretty damning stuff from Paul Robinson. I don't necessarily think any of it is untrue. For sure, I think a lot rides on those cup competitions this season, but don't forget, the Europa League is a competition where if we could get to win it, it's a very big if, then we would get directly into the Champions League. I personally think if Spurs were to finish 10th and win the Carabao Cup, although a lot of fans would be happy to get that kind of trophy monkey off the back, do I think necessarily that would keep Ange in his job for the season next year? Maybe for the start, but if he had a bad start like one day Ramos did after winning the Carabao Cup, then he'd be out as well. So it is a difficult dance that Ange has to do. He knows that we want trophies, but he also knows that we wanted exciting attacking football, and we've got more of that, and he wants to bring us even more of that by getting more of his players in, by really making sure that the current crop know how to play the system, and to keep going forward. I still think, stick with it, stick with the project, be patient with Ange, deal with the ups and downs, and by God was that Ipswich a down point, we know that, but like I said on this watch-along yesterday on bigup.com actually, it would not surprise me at all if we turned up at Etihad and beat Manchester City. We went to Man City and we drew 3-3 with them last year with Emerson Royal and Ben Davies playing at centre-back. We beat Manchester City there a few years ago. Sure, we had Harry Kane, but we're a bit of a bogey side for them. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, doesn't mean it'll definitely happen. But one thing I can tell you is it's unlikely to be a draw. We'll either get pumped by Man City, in which case Ange will be under quite a lot of pressure because we'll be down in probably 11th or 12th or 13th place, or we will give them a good game and maybe we'll even win because we will make chances there. Man City will leave space at the back for us to run into. In terms of what Paul Robinson was saying, yeah, I think it mostly makes sense. I do think Ange Postecoglou is in a bit of a beneficial position because there aren't any kind of guaranteed kind of big winner managers who are available on the market at the moment. So it would involve Spurs, I think, taking another risk for someone like Iraola or another young manager. So I think Postecoglou's got a bit of collateral in the bank. I do think the fact that the football is good helps. I think the fact that we've had injuries, Van der Ven has been out, and I think we'd have a lot more points on the board if Van der Ven had been fit. I think that counts in Postecoglou's favour. Got to hope that Van der Ven is fit for that Man City game. There were talks that he would be available after the international break, but I do wonder if it'll come a game too soon. Obviously, Richarlison out, Odegaard out. Looks like Christian Romero might be out. So it's not going to be easy by any means, and Dragushin will continue playing at centre-back, I'm sure, but hopefully that will be alongside Mickey Van der Ven. And in terms of Paul Robinson, listen, he's on a podcast, he's got to give his opinions. I think most of it is kind of true. He's not really going in on Ange Postecoglou saying he doesn't rate him, but he is just saying that there needs to be signs of progression. And as an ex-Spurs player, he knows what it's like at Spurs. He knows the pressure. And it's all about progression and trophies. And then finally in today's episode, some more quotes coming out from Hugo Lloris from the serialization of his autobiography. He said the following: "My big question, and I say this in my book, what would have happened if we got to stay one more year at the old White Hart Lane? Because when we left that stadium, I think we were more ready than ever to compete for the Premier League. But we had to move to Wembley and to adapt to a new stadium and try to make it like our own stadium. But it was not the case, and this difficulty we managed to keep the consistency. We managed to stay in the top four and to qualify for the Champions League. So it was still positive. But the only miss that we can feel is probably the trophy. We had 3 finals that we didn't win. I think that group of players and Mauricio at the time was ready to win. Then you just don't know in football. It's so unpredictable. But the feeling that we had staying unbeaten at home for that whole season, we were getting close. but that's part of the story of the club. There was a decision, and it was part of the evolution of the club, moving to a bigger stadium. And I think today, all the Spurs fans are so proud of the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It's one of the best football grounds in the world. We started to drop points really early when we had to play at Wembley, and those points can make the difference at the end of the year, especially at home. At home, you just want the perfect way, and we lost time to find reference. White Hart Lane, before we left, was kind of a fortress. Well, it was, and we did have to move to Wembley, and it was difficult. But the reality was that Northumberland development project that Daniel Levy and Enoch had put into plans kind of nigh on 20 years previously. They'd started that project. They felt that to grow, to get up to the standard of revenue that Arsenal and Man United and the other clubs were bringing in, they had to build a new stadium, and those plans were in for a long time. So it was just... The reality is, I've said it before, Tottenham were ahead of schedule when Pochettino came in. Not when Pochettino came in, but Pochettino got us ahead of schedule by getting that team playing so well and getting the football so good and getting us so close to winning the league. That wasn't really in the plans of the club. The plans of the club were to build the new ground and then build up to that, get into the Champions League and become a title challenger in the years after that. And we became ahead of schedule, and that kind of threw things out, and that's what made it so upsetting, I think, for the fans as well as the players, that we weren't able to build on where we were at the time. We weren't able to invest in the team to bring new players in. We had to not spend money for 2 transfer windows in a row because of the amount of money we'd spent and the overspend on the stadium. It was a difficult time, but everything Hugo Lloris is saying is correct. It was a fortress in that last season at White Hart Lane. Nobody could beat us there. We had some amazing scalps there, Arsenal, Manchester United, etc., etc. But the club was trying to grow, and we're still trying to grow, and we're still trying to get to that next stage now where, yes, the revenue's coming in, but we're massively in debt. But we need to get to that next stage where we're able to get and spend £100 million on a player to really improve the first team now. Arsenal are ahead of us because they moved into their new stadium in 2006, and we are still playing catch-up, unfortunately. Even though we had those kind of 6-7 years where we were better than them, we still need to play catch-up in terms of where our finances are. But we will get there. Stay patient, Tottenham fans. Everything will be good. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please do drop the video a like. Subscribe to the channel if you don't already for daily Spurs and transfer content from across the Premier League and abroad. And also, listen on the podcast platforms, be that Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Go over there, type in the Spurred On podcast. Give me a 5-star rating if you like what I do, and feel free to listen to these daily episodes while you're out running or driving or walking the dog or whatever you do. Have a great rest of your Monday. Come on, you Spurs.